Hello and good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session, all of you. If you remember last session, we talked about the history of language tests, the history of testing, and how in ancient times, historically, tests and language tests have been used and have evolved into their today's format, appearance, and function. Well, in this session, I'll first try to define in a generic sense what a language test is, and then we'll discuss the functions of tests, the roles that they play in today's society, and hopefully we will have an informative, fruitful discussion of language tests. Okay? So ready? Shall we go? All right, so fasten your seat belts, stay seated, don't change your seats, and we're going to take off, okay? My dear Iraqi friends. So do you see this powerful PowerPoint slide? You do. Great. Okay, then in this session, first we ask, what is a test? What is a language test? And then we ask the next question, which is, what are the functions of tests? Why do we use language tests? Well, so the term language tests consists of two words. It consists of language and it consists of test, okay? If we want to know what a language test is, we should be able to define, to the extent possible, these two terms. So what is language? Okay, this is one of the most difficult questions. And scholars, linguists, philosophers, anthropologists have tried in different ways to define what language is. And so far, there is no definition of language upon which everybody agrees, okay? So, because of this complexity and all the controversy which surrounds the notion of language, I choose to, in this session, I choose to stay away from this controversy and just pretend that this is a straightforward concept and we all know what we mean by language. And then hopefully in another session, maybe next session, we will discuss the notion of language, what language is. So for the moment, for this session, we pretend that it is simple, we know what language is, and so we're going to define a language test. So to define a language test, first we should define a test. What is a test? Can you define a test? Can you tell me what a test is? A way to measure a person's ability. A way. What is that way? A procedure. Good. Others are typing. I'm waiting for your typed answers. Sarmat says it is an educational assessment. So what is an assessment? Intended to measure a test taker's knowledge, skill, aptitude, fitness, or classification in many other topics. Okay, Sarmat. Assam, a purpose of identifying insiders and outsiders in a society. Test acts as a weapon. Interesting. To establish the quality, performance, or reliability of something. In us, the shibboleth test uses language as a medium detection. Good. Okay, so Muhammad Ali says language is the measurement of a person's ability to use language in some way. Assam says to verify identity. Shema, take measures to check the quality, performance, availability. Okay, thank you very much for all your comments. For all the definitions you gave do in fact touch upon what a test is, but for the purpose of this session, I'm going to, following other scholars, define a test as a sample of of behavior which we collect to make a judgment about a person's knowledge, ability, or ability. So what is important here is that we collect a sample of behavior. Why do we collect a sample? Because we are pressed for time and resources. We can't follow a person for a lifetime. I mean, it would be ideally great, perfect, if we could follow a person for a long time in everyday moment and then come up with a judgment. But the problem is that this is not practical. We can't follow a people for a lifetime to make a judgment about them. Therefore, we rely on collecting a small sample of their performance or behavior, and we trust that this sample of behavior represents the universe of behaviors that these individuals are going to have in other relevant target domains. Okay. So, for example, when we give a math test, well, ideally it would be perfect if we could observe this person for a very, very long time whenever he or she uses mathematics knowledge, when doing calculation, when going to a supermarket and calculating the costs and the person went to the gas station, when the person calculates his or her income and debts and so on. But this is not possible. You know that we can't do this. So we collect a sample, a small sample of math behavior, and so we create an artificial context or situation where the person can give us a sample of his or her math behavior. So usually this sample of math behavior consists of a number of questions, maybe 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 math questions over a limited period of time. Maybe we give the person 1 hour or 2 hours. And after that, we quantify, we impose quantification or measurement on this performance, and we come up with a number, with which we call it a mark or a score or a grade. Sometimes we don't come up with a number, we come up with a letter, for example, A plus, B plus, C, and so on and so forth. So this is a test. We collect a sample of behavior, we quantify the sample, and then we take this sample to represent all the future and past behavior of the person in different relevant target domains. So this is the definition of a test. Now, what is a language test? A language test is again a sample of verbal behavior. So when we say behavior is general. It could be math behavior, it could be physical behavior, it could be let's say emotional behavior. But when we are going to design or create a language test, we collect a sample of communication behavior or verbal language, linguistic behavior, and then we try to quantify, to translate this sample into a number. And the most important thing is that we are not only going to make a judgment based on this sample, but we are going to make a decision about the person. Okay, so we don't give tests to people just for free, for fun, for leisure. We don't do this. We have a purpose. So after making a judgment about the person, so for example, I may collect a sample of verbal behavior from you, and that sample could be a 5-minute interview. Then I make a judgment. What is my judgment? I may make the judgment that this person has superb English or Arabic or whatever language proficiency. Okay? So this is a judgment. I make a judgment. But what is this judgment for? I'm going to use this judgment for a purpose. Usually we want to make a decision about the person. And the purposes or decisions that we use language tests are the topic of the next slide. So let's call this slide functions of language tests. Can you tell me some functions of language tests after making a judgment? What decisions we may make based on the judgment that we make of the individual language behavior? So the question is this: we collect a sample of verbal behavior, we quantify it, we translate it into a number which we call measurement, and then we make a judgment. Then we are going to use this judgment for a purpose. We want to make decisions based on the judgment. Can you name some of those decisions that we make based on results of the language test? So the person may be suitable for something, for a job. Okay. Yeah, that is one possible decision that we may make. Shima, Osam, and others are typing. So what do you mean by evaluating Muhammad? Determine a person's knowledge. For what? Determine a person of evaluating for what? Determining knowledge for what? I'm looking for that what? For that purpose, for that decision. Why do you want to determine a person's knowledge? Why do we want to evaluate a person? I mean, what are the concrete purposes for which we use language tests? To distinguish outsider. What do you mean, Sohad, outsider from insider? Inas, a motive in art? I don't know what you mean, Inas. Again, my question is this: why do we want to distinguish different abilities? Why? To reach the goal. What is the goal? The question is this: what is the goal? Why do we want to discriminate the person's ability? You are not answering my question. To meet their needs. What needs? I guess maybe I didn't formulate my question in the best possible way. So let me give you an example. You know that these days thousands of people are taking IELTS or TOEFL exam. Okay? Why? What decisions are made after a person takes IELTS or TOEFL? Shiva says to discover. No, this is not a decision to discover how much they have been learning. Ali At-Taraji, Muhammad, to measure his qualification. Why? Again, my question is this: why do we measure proficiency? Why do we measure qualification? Sarmat, travel. What do you mean, Sarmat? Okay, Assam. And desire to migrate or study abroad. Yeah, this is true. So one one purpose, one function of the language tests is to make this decision, and that is a migration decision. When people take IELTS or TOEFL or other international tests, they want to travel, they want to move, they want to change their place of living, maybe permanently or for a given amount of time. Okay? Now, those people in English-speaking countries, they don't allow everybody to enter their countries. Okay? To give you a visa, to give you a permission to enter their country, they ask you, in fact, they force you to take an IELTS or TOEFL exam. So what is TOEFL and IELTS? These are just samples of English verbal behavior. They take a sample of your English language behavior, then they quantify it, they measure it, they translate your performance into a number, and then they make a decision. What is the decision? Whether you are allowed to enter an English-speaking country or you're not allowed. So it doesn't matter whether you want to enter that country as a student or as a refugee or whatever. These decisions are made, at least partly made, based on that sample of performance that you demonstrate, you give them, and which is translated into a number. So this is one function of language tests. They are used for migration purposes, making a decision about whether a person is allowed to migrate or not. The next function is this: to make pass or fail decisions. Okay? So in the context of a school or classroom, teachers give tests to students. They ask the students to give them a sample of their English verbal behavior, and based on that sample, teachers make a decision about whether or if the person is allowed to pass that course or to make a fail decision. Okay. Again, this is one of the decisions that today we make based on language tests. Remember that 300 years ago there was no such a thing. You would attend a course, you would give a gift to your teacher, and there was no passing or failing. It was not clear who passes, who fails. You seem that your presence, your attendance in the course was all that mattered, and at the end there would be no quantification and no decision would be made about you based on the language test. So this is another use of language tests. Another decision which may be made based on a language test is placement. Now imagine that you are in charge of a language school and language learners keep coming to you. They want to learn English, and you can't put all these people in the same class because they come with different backgrounds in English, with different experiences. Therefore, if we put them in the same class, both the students and teachers will be uncomfortable. The teacher doesn't know who to teach because the class is heterogeneous. And some students will feel bored because the level of the class is too low for some of them. The class will be too difficult, and therefore to create classes where class members are more or less the same in terms of English fluency, we give them a placement test, and based on their performance. So in the placement test, they give us a sample of their English language behavior, and based on that sample, we make a decision about the level of the person, and we place learners into different classes. So this is another decision that we may make based on a language test. Yeah, sometimes we make a language test for admission purposes. For example, in different countries, universities make admission decisions about students. So universities cannot allow everybody to enter university, everybody who likes to, everybody who has the motivation to attend universities. So for example, if they open the gates of universities and say, well, everybody who likes to come is welcome, then it would be impossible to manage the universities because, for example, everybody would like to attend medical courses. So the university cannot practically deal with all these people who like to be doctors or physicians in future. To manage this problem, to prevent this chaos from happening, universities give admission tests. And sometimes these admission tests are language tests. For example, in Iran, future translators, future English teachers take an admission test every year, and those who perform better, those who score higher, are admitted to translation or teaching courses. So, and therefore, one other function of language test is admission, to determine who is admitted to university or to a job and who is not admitted or rejected. Again, imagine that you are in charge of a language institute and you want to employ teachers. So therefore, you put an advertisement out there and you ask volunteers to come to your institute. So you may need 5 teachers, but maybe 50, 100 people would apply. Then you have to select. You have to choose 5 among 100 potential applicants or volunteers. And to do that, again, you may ask them to give you a sample of their English verbal behavior. Then you quantify their behavior and choose 5 teachers among the 100 potential candidates. So this is called a selection decision. You select, based on a language test, a small number of teachers from a pool of, let's say, 100 teachers. As one of you mentioned, another function of language test is diagnosis. So the same way, when you refer to a hospital or a clinic, when they want to see what the problem is that made you refer to a hospital or clinic, they give you different tests. You may be asked to to take an MRI, to take sonography. They may take a sample of your blood or whatever, and based on that sample, they try to diagnose the problem. In the same manner, in education, sometimes we ask people to give us a sample of their behavior, which is a test. Then we look at the sample and we try to diagnose the areas of weakness or strength in order to change or modify our teaching programs, our teaching methods, our teaching content, or to help the learners be aware of their areas of strength and weakness, and give them the proper feedback to improve. Okay? So far so good. Are you following me? Great. Thank you very much. My dear Iraqi friends. Yeah, selection. I gave you this example that, for example, you're in charge of an institute, a language institute or language school. You need teachers. You need, let's say, 5 teachers. You put an advertisement out there. You advertise the position. Then 100 people apply to come and work or get employed in your language school. So because you need only 5 of them, you can't accommodate, you can't employ all the 100 applicants. So you have to use a mechanism to reject 95 and choose or select just 5 of them. So in this scenario, again, we give them a language test. And based on their performance, based on that sample of behavior, we choose the 5 teacher with the highest score, with the highest mark on that sample of behavior, and we would reject the rest of the candidates. This would be a selection function of language tests. You're welcome. And the other function of language test is intimidation and control. Okay. So sometimes we teachers and other people in society, politicians and powerful institutions, we use language tests to intimidate and control people. So in the context of a classroom, we as teachers may intimidate students that if they don't do this, or if they don't do that, or if they don't behave this way or that way, we may intimidate them that we will reduce their grades, we will fail them. So in the context of a classroom, if a student disturbs the class or is too noisy or shows behavior which we don't like, then one way to intimidate and control the person is for teachers to make use of language tests scores and intimidate the person, warn, threaten the person that if he or she doesn't conform to our expectations, if he or she doesn't show the behavior that we like to, then we threaten the person that we will reduce his or her language test scores. So this is the intimidation or control function, and it is very, very common. And many students show respect for teachers, not because the teachers really deserve respect, But because of this intimidation, they fear that if they don't show that respect, then their test scores may suffer, and therefore it is a powerful function that language tests have, and many teachers or other people who have power use the power of language and language tests to control, to regulate, to suppress, to intimidate, and to threaten students or other citizens. It is also used in other situations such as home. Yeah, I agree. Why not? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, as punishment. Yeah. I totally agree. I don't know if you're familiar with Michel Foucault. Foucault has a book called Prison and Punishment. Prison and Punishment. And interestingly, in this book, he has a chapter on examinations. And he argues that examinations are, in fact, instruments of making a prison and punishing citizens and learners. And his argument for the prison notion is that using examinations, we can create a prison which doesn't have walls. So you know that usually prisons have walls and roofs. You are put in an enclosed physical space and you're not allowed to leave that place. But in an invisible prison which doesn't have walls, the citizens do not see a wall around themselves. They don't feel that they're in prison, but they are in fact in prison. How? For example, you have taken this course with me. There is potentially a large number of books and topics and papers that you can read on language testing and assessment and enjoy. Okay? However, when you know that there would be an exam at the end of this semester which would test your knowledge of language testing, you would limit yourself to what I am presenting. Okay? So there might be other alternative textbooks, topics, discussions, papers which are more interesting to you, but you control yourself, you don't read them, and you limit yourself to what you think I identify as language testing. So this way, the fact that the anticipation that there is going to be a language test at the end of this semester, this way I create an invisible prison in which you can't maneuver. I mean, you don't have the freedom to maneuver across different papers, materials, textbook, theories, or discussions, or debates around language testing. So I don't need to put you in a certain building which we call a prison. So what is the function of a prison? A prison is an invention for control. We control people who we think are criminals, or they have committed something wrong. So the function is control, and examination can play the same role. We can control people, we can control what they read, how they read, what they think about, how they think about what they think. And when we control their thinking, we know that behavior comes from thinking. So indirectly, when we control their thinking, we are controlling their behavior. And therefore, according to Foucault, one of the major functions of language tests and other examinations is to control, suppress, monitor, and to do surveillance about people. And even we teachers do it. We misuse the power of tests, the power of language tests, to threaten, to control, and to make people conform to our wishes and expectations. I have published a paper on this issue of power. You can access the paper and read it. Let me search it on the internet and I'll give you its title. That paper was about how Iranian college professors use the power of tests to control students from the perspective of students. So let me search it, the power of powerless tests. Yeah, this is the title of that paper. I'll share it with you. If you like, you can read this paper and see if to what extent it is true in the Iraqi context. So this is the paper which I published several years ago. The power of powerless language tests, test takers' perceptions. So you can read it for next session, and if we have time, we can discuss that paper. Feel free to criticize the paper. You don't have to agree with whatever I have written in the paper. So don't hesitate to raise your criticisms if you have any on the paper. Try to relate it to the Iraqi context and to what extent you think what I have found in Iranian context is also true for the Iraqi contexts. So that's it about the functions of language tests. For the moment, nothing else comes to my mind. So I gave you this introduction to say that language tests serve different purposes and functions in today's society. So back to the definition of language test. Several years ago, a PhD student asked me in the very first session of the language testing course, he asked me, do you think language testing is a field of knowledge or science? Why should we pass a course on language testing? And it was an interesting question, and at that moment I didn't have an answer at my disposal. But it kept me thinking about why do MA and PhD students need to know about language testing? What is complicated about language tests? Well, we know that every teacher is using the tests. People every day, every week, every month, every year in different schools and universities and learning institutions, they are giving tests, they are scoring tests, they are making decisions based on tests. So why should we be concerned about a phenomenon which is so common and everybody's doing it? It has become part of the daily life of citizens in today's world. Why should we consider this as a field of knowledge or science? To answer this question, we should go back to the definition, that a test is a sample of verbal behavior or making judgments and decisions about people. So this seems to be an easy and a straightforward definition. But when we reflect on this definition, we see that it is easier said than done. One major complexity is how we do the sampling. I mean, how much sample is enough? This is one question. The other is, how do we collect the sample? And what do we sample? What do we choose? What behavior do we take to be indicative of knowledge, ability, proficiency, fluency, competence, performance, whatsoever? Okay. So, therefore, it is not clear first how much sample, how large or small the sample should be to allow us to make a proper judgment and a subsequent proper decision. And the other complexity is, what should we sample? We know that language is a huge phenomenon. So to select a sample is very difficult, because we want, at the end of the day, we want to argue that the sample that we collected represents or can be taken as representative of all the future language behavior and communication behavior of the person. So the complexity and the difficulty is to choose the sample, to decide what samples we should collect to be sure that it represents the target behavior of the test takers. So a test, as I said, is a sample of behavior, and we take this sample of behavior to be an indication or a representative of a target domain, domain of behavior. To give an example, suppose that how many of you have a driving license? Just send a plus if you have a driving license. Do you have a driving license? Zainab, Hassan, Ali, others? Kazim, Chasib, Shima. So Hassan, yes. Hassan, yes. Sarma, no. Shima, yes. The next question, did you take a test to get your driving license? Yes. Shima, did you take your driving license without taking a test? Shima, do you have a driving license? No, okay. But those of you who have taken who have a driving license, you are familiar with the test. You know that you go there, and in Iran, the test has two parts. The first one is a written test, and the other one is a driving test. In the driving test, you as a test taker just sit behind the wheel, and the officer sits on the passenger seat, and you have about 10 to 15 minutes to drive the car. So this is a sample of your driving behavior. The officer may ask you to do a double park. He or she may ask you to take a back gear. He or she may ask you to drive on the street in traffic. But usually the test takes no longer than half an hour. And so it is a sample of your driving behavior. Okay? And the officer trusts that this sample represents your future driving behavior. That if you drive well here in this sample, hopefully you're going to drive similarly in your actual driving later on in your life. And if you are a poor driver in this short sample, then the officer infers that you are going to be a poor driver when you are actually driving your own car. Now, you may consider yourself a good driver. You may take the driving test, and then you come home and tell your parents and family that I failed the test. The test wasn't fair. They failed me, although I'm a good driver. When you make such a claim, you are questioning the adequacy of that sample of driving behavior that they collected from you. You believe that that sample didn't represent your true, actual driving ability and capacity. And there are many test takers, thousands of test takers, not only in driving, but in mathematics, in language, in chemistry, in history, in language, everything, who come out of exam sessions unhappy, unsatisfied, because they believe that the sample of behavior which was collected from them on the testing session didn't represent their actual capacity and knowledge in that particular domain of behavior. So because of this dissatisfaction which might arise, language testing and testing is a field of expertise where we study how to do the sampling and how to quantify that sample into a number, how to translate that sample into a number which can capture and summarize the the behavior of the person who took the test. And then again, language testing is about how we can make the right decisions about people based on that score from a language test. And also, language testing is about the consequences that the tests have for students, for learners, for parents, for institutions, for colleges, for hospitals, and for the wider society. So I stop here and I want you to, for the next session, study the paper which I shared with you. And I don't want you to read it and memorize it. I want you to read it and critique it, criticize it, disagree with it. I mean, it is not holy Quran to accept whatever it says. That the paper is just my opinion, and I want you to read it with suspicion, with skepticism, and try to criticize it as much as you can. Thank you very much for attending. I wish you a great day. I wish you a great week and weekend. And we will see you next time. Just one point. You know that we have missed several sessions, and therefore we should compensate for those sessions. And I just want you to tell me what time we can have the makeup sessions.
Good morning, doctor.
Makeup sessions. I mean,
sorry, doctor.
when
Can
are you
you
free?
make it on Friday
Yeah,
in the afternoon?
Ali Ad-Daraji, you can talk.
Yes, but it's a makeup session.
Yes, go
You
on.
know, you know that we have many.
Friday, no. Friday is a holiday. I don't teach on Fridays. Yeah, it's a makeup session, but can I have your number, Mr. Ad-Daraji?
Okay, doctor.
Could you please write your number in this chat box? Then we can arrange it together. So I'll think about it, and if it is appropriate, I will get in touch with Mr. Ad-Daraji, and I guess Mr. Ad-Daraji can inform others. Yeah. But on Friday, no, because on Fridays I don't teach. It is the day I reserve for family, for other stuff. So I don't think Friday is a good option. 9647707. 31307. Isn't it too long? Mr. Ad-Daraji.
Yes, doctor. I have a telegram. And I have your
Abdelaziz,
number,
I
but
think I'm not going to call
you
you.
don't
I
refer
may
to me.
reach you via Telegram. Do you have the Telegram app? Okay, that's okay. Well, I'm too busy. I don't answer all the messages or emails which I receive. I just selectively sometimes answer some messages. So I'll get in touch with you and we will arrange makeup sessions hopefully. So thank you very much. Have a good time. Read the papers you are advised to read and wish you a great weekend.